Today we're taking a look at the biggest and baddest Grav tank of the lot, the Primaris Astraeus. Let's see if its new revamped rules for 9th edition will cut the mustard. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we'll be taking a look at the Primaris Astraeus with a review of its datasheet, any obvious combos and synergies, and how I think it might perform in game. As a Forge World model, of course the Astraeus has a fairly hefty price tag. It's £231 in the UK, or $355 in the US, so you must certainly be paying a bit of a resin tax to include it in your army. In the background, the Astraeus Super Heavy Grav tank represents the pinnacle of modern Imperial engineering, and incidentally is named after the Greek god of the dusk and winds. The Astraeus uses similar anti-grav technology such as the repulsor and the impulsor, giving it a very stable firing platform for its powerful weapon systems, and its thick armour is further augmented by numerous void shields, which can protect the tank from the largest weapons the enemy can bring to bear. The design blends the recent innovations of grav technology in the Imperium along with an ancient STC recovered by the Minotaurs chapter, and is manufactured on distant forge worlds far from Mars's gaze. For a primary weapon, the tank boasts a macro accelerator cannon, a large kinetic weapon that accelerates ferrocarbide slugs to extraordinary speeds, extremely rapid firing projectiles that can break straight through enemy tank armour. All very nice, so let's see what this guy can do in game. So the Astraeus is a Lord of War choice for Codex Space Marines. Its rules are found in this new Imperial Armour Compendium, and its power level 35 or 675 points to field in its cheapest incarnation. Being a Lord of War means you're either going to need a super heavy detachment or a super heavy auxiliary, so you are going to be paying some command points to be fielding this thing. In terms of upgrades, you can get it to be a maximum of 710 points if you take both the Iron Hail Stubber and the Twin Lascannon. Unsurprisingly, its stat line is pretty beefy for such a big investment. Its movement 12 inches, weapon skill 5+, ballistic skill 3+, strength and toughness 8, a massive 30 wounds, 6 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2+ save. The wounds characteristic has increased a bit from 8th edition where it only had 24. As we mentioned in the background, the tank's also protected by some void shields. These give it a 5+ invul save and also have really quite a neat special rule that I think is really quite a lot more helpful than previously. Basically, each of these void shields represents an additional 3 wounds to the tank, and they almost function as an extra model that must be shot through before the tank can be directly targeted. Basically, when you fail a save for your Astraeus, the amount of damage goes to the first void shield, and say if you took 6 damage from it, you just lose 3 wounds of that void shield and the rest will be wasted, and that void shield will be collapsed and gone. It's actually really quite a neat trick for protecting it against very high strength and damage weapons. Even if you were hit by a shadow sword or something like that, you're still only ever going to take a maximum of 3 damage from that if you are hitting the void shields before the tank. If a void shield is partly damaged but not destroyed, it will regain up to its full amount at the start of your next command phase, but otherwise if they're completely shot through, then they're just gone and they don't take any more effect in the rest of the game. Overall, I like this change a lot better than the degrading invulnerable save that the tank had before. This one just makes a lot more sense with the background of void shields. In any case, between 2+ armour, high toughness, loads of wounds and 2 of these, this tank isn't going to go anywhere fast. You're going to need a lot of dedicated anti-tank firepower to bring it down. Its primary gun is that twin macro accelerator cannon. That one's got a 72-inch range, it's heavy 12, strength 8, AP -2 and a flat damage of 3. A good generalist profile there, that's going to do damage against pretty much anything you point it at, and it will be particularly decent at chewing through things like toughness 7 vehicles or models with 3 wounds such as Gravis armour. In terms of sponsons, it can either take a set of 2 Las Rippers or 2 Plasma Exterminators. The Las Rippers are 36-inch range, heavy 2, strength 9, AP -3 and d6 damage, so they're each essentially short-range twin las cannons. And then you've got 2 Plasma Exterminators. They also have 36-inch range, they're heavy d6, strength 7, AP -4, damage 2 and have the blast special rule, and of course as they're plasma you can overcharge them so they become strength 8 and damage 3. It kind of goes quite nicely with the main gun. Again, pretty much nothing in the game is really going to want to get hit by that. It's also equipped with a Storm Bolter, a Twin Heavy Bolter, and you can swap those Twin Heavy Bolters for a Twin Las Cannon if you want to stomp up 30 points. In terms of special rules, it has Angels of Death, which will be really quite helpful in turn 1 for Devastator Doctrine. I think the Macro Accelerator Cannon will be very much helped out by being AP -3. It has the Hover Tank rule, the same as the Gladiator Tank in Core Codex Space Marines. That's the one that you measure to the hull or the base, whichever is closest. and if it explodes it goes up with really quite a big bang. Everything within 2d6 inches takes d6 mortal wounds. Finally, in terms of keywords, it's a vehicle. It can fly, which is actually really quite helpful. This thing's got quite a large profile, so it's pretty handy to just be able to hover over annoying bits of intervening terrain. It's titanic, which will mean it can fall back and shoot, but it does mean that you won't get any benefits from the obscuring terrain rule. It has machine spirit, which makes it usable for the power of the machine spirit stratagem, and it has repulsor field, which again allows you access to the Grav pulse stratagem. We'll get onto those in just a bit. Overall, it's basically a big, tough, reasonably fast anchor unit. I feel like it's perhaps a little bit more impressive in how tough it is rather than its damage output, and if you are fielding it in a 2000 point game, it's likely to be a linchpin unit around which you base your whole strategy. If we turn our attention to the damage output of the guns, I'd firstly say that for 5 points the Iron Hail Heavy Stubber seems like a pretty good deal to me. I'd generally just bolt that one on. Compared with the Twin Heavy Bolter though, the Twin Lascannon does look like it's paying a pretty hefty premium over it. For most other vehicles, Twin Lascannons aren't all that much more expensive than Twin Heavy Bolters, and I think I would typically be tempted to keep that Twin Heavy Bolter over the Lascannon myself. For the sponsons, I'm quite a big fan of the Plasma Exterminators. I think in general they will do you better against most targets. The Las Talons only really come out ahead if you're targeting toughness 8 vehicles. In terms of some numbers, Las Talons will put around about 5.2 wounds on a toughness 7 vehicle, or average about 2 dead intercessors. If you don't overcharge the Plasma Exterminators, then you're looking at about 4.7 wounds on your toughness 7 vehicle. It's really not all that much less than the Las Talons, but they do significantly better against the light infantry, killing around 3 intercessors if they don't overcharge. Overcharging of course will risk you mortal wounds, as most of the time this won't have any way to get rerolls to hit, but it makes it really great against toughness 7 armour. You'd average 9 wounds on a tank from your 2 Plasma Exterminators taking aim at it. At the moment I think I prefer to have the flexibility of the Exterminators myself. While we're talking damage output, the main gun's likely to do around about 9 or 12 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, or kill around about 4 or 5 Primaris Marines if you're taking aim at them. I'd say its damage output is okay, but you have to bear in mind just how many points you're putting into this. You could get a lot of firepower by taking other units. So what sort of combos and synergies can we use with the Astraeus then? First of all, if you actually want to use the chapter tactics, you're going to need a full super heavy detachment, so 3 Lords of War of one sort or another. If you take it in a super heavy auxiliary, then it's not going to gain the chapter tactic. I think that's the way that it will tend to be fielded, to be honest, so your choice of chapter might be better off based on what sort of super doctrine they get, or what sort of stratagems, options and combos they have, rather than the chapter tactic that you're not going to be getting most of the time. Most chapters do have something to offer the Astraeus in terms of unique options. Dark Angels, if you can get the chapter tactic, would be amazing. Hitting on 2s if you're stationary is pretty powerful, and they could potentially utilise a Dark Shroud to make it -1 to hit. Iron Hands would very much like a slower degrading profile and 6+ feel no pain if they can get it, but they have some really good psychic powers that work for vehicles like this. You could have it hitting on 2s, improving its armor save, or repairing it with psychic mastery, and it's also a pretty awesome target for the Ironstone. You'd basically be giving the tank duty eternal. All sorts of other armies have good options though. Raven Guard could get it in cover permanently, Imperial Fist could give it bonus to wound against tanks, and if you could get the chapter tactic then ignoring cover would be great. In terms of character support, things are a little bit limited as it's not a core unit of course, but a Tech Marine or Master of the Forge seems like really quite a good idea. They can awaken its machine spirit and allow it to hit on 2s, and it seems a near enough auto-include when you're buffing this much firepower. The healing would be a nice secondary benefit to taking them. Otherwise, Librarians could be helpful as well for some chapter-specific psychic powers. We mentioned the Iron Hands one, but I think that the Salamanders could be pretty cool as well. You could make the Astraeus toughness 9 and also be -1 to hit with Fire Shield. Basically near enough any defensive or offensive buff that you can put on the tank with Warlord traits or relics will tend to be worth it for the Astraeus as it's just so big. In terms of stratagems, Power of the Machine Spirit is a really good one. It's 2 command points to have it fire on the full profile, and if that's going to make the difference of whether or not it hits on 3s, then it could well be 2 points well spent. Grav Pulse for 1 command point will reduce your opponent's charges by 2, could be a very nice way to let an elite assault unit flounder rather than charging it, and Armour of Contempt could be potentially useful if you're about to get hit by a bunch of mortal wounds. The mortal wounds do go straight through void shields. Again, anything to make it more durable or more hitty with chapter specific stratagems would be great, and it could also be a very decent target for using Overwatch with. You'd have a pretty decent chance of cutting down at least a few assailants before they even got to you. I think out of these various buffing options, I'm really quite a fan of an Iron Hands Tech Marine with the Ironstone. You'd be basically guaranteeing that that tank is an unmoving thorn in your opponent's side all game long. So how would I think about using this tank in game then? First of all, I think if I was taking an Astraeus, I would be very tempted to take that Tech Marine alongside. Hitting on 2s would be the main reason, but also those repairs thrown in is just a nice bonus and you get another small fighty character. I think quite carefully about deployment, as you're essentially putting a whole ton of your army down all in one model, and I'd probably try and drop it quite late when you can react to the majority of your opponent's army. Ideally it'd want to be somewhere where it's got good lines of sight, and hopefully not get into some sort of situation where you can't shoot the enemies that are shooting it because they're hiding out of line of sight behind obscuring terrain. You might also want to think about movement lanes as well. It does have fly, which would help, but you want to have somewhere where there's enough room to physically position the tank, so you're not just boxing yourself into a corner or something. You could also think about using its decent movement to try and outrange enemy units turn 1, and then move up and get in range with those 36-inch ranged guns when you get to your own turn. Turning the guns on to delete the enemy isn't going to be anything too complicated, though I would probably try and fire it fairly early in the shooting phase, and I'd want to put the main cannon into something fairly attacked with a lot of wounds left, just in case you roll very high, as you could theoretically have anything up to 36 damage through on one target if you did roll perfectly. If your opponent doesn't have too many significant melee threats, you could afford to be fairly bold with it, jump it forward and tie up enemy units before falling back to shoot, as it can because it's Titanic. Power of the Machine Spirit could be 2 command points very well spent when it takes damage, as could Overwatch, or using the Grav wave if it does ever stop a fighty unit from charging you. From first impressions of the new datasheet, I do feel like it looks like the Astraeus looks fairly usable at the moment. I'm still not convinced that its damage output is spectacular for almost 700 points, but I think that there's some value in the fact that it all comes in one big mass, and if your opponent can't actually chew through all of those essentially 36 wounds at 2+ armor save, then it means that you won't have any degrading in your damage output because you can just use Power of the Machine Spirit to keep it firing on full profile. It's going to be a massive annoyance and keep on smashing enemy threats to bits until it's actually blown up. I would consider it against other big Space Marine threats. In particular, things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts with Macroplasma Incinerators would be quite a good other option if you were thinking about this. They pack a whole bunch of generalist firepower, are really quite durable with Duty Eternal, and can also fight in melee. If you're after Grav tanks, you might consider thinking about the Gladiator Valiant. 3 of those would cost you 750 points, so only a small amount more than one Astraeus. I don't think that they're quite as tough with only a 3+ armor save and no invul, but they would churn out an absolute ton of anti-tank firepower with no less than 24 heavy anti-tank shots at 24-inch range. I think the Astraeus does have its niche though. As I said, just not losing any damage output is great, and also you'll get massive returns on every single buff that you can put on the unit, whether it's just the +1 to hit from the Tech Marine or something fancy like the Ironstone. I'll certainly be interested to see if anyone can make this guy work in tournaments. So let me know what you think of the Primaris Super Heavy down in the comments below. Is it worth it, or is nearly 700 points just a bit too much to justify? Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll hopefully be covering plenty more datasheets from the Forge World Compendium as we go forward, so stay tuned if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and keep these videos coming, I'd just like to mention that I do have an Element Games affiliate link, which you can find down in the video description. Element Games is a UK-based discount retailer, and it does 10 to 20% off 40k miniatures, and if you buy anything after clicking on the Element Games link, then a small amount goes to Auspex Tactics without costing you any more whatsoever. It can just be a way to help support the channel on miniatures that you were already thinking about buying. For people in the USA and Canada, I also have an Amazon link which works very similarly. Again, just click on that, order whatever you were thinking about buying off Amazon, and a small amount goes to the channel without costing you any more. A massive thank you to all of you who have been using those. It really does help me justify spending quite so much time making videos on YouTube. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.